won't believe what I found in a sealed medical vault in Minneapolis. 23 death certificates, signed, dated, witnessed by 3 doctors. 23 dying patients, given hours to live. 23 impossible recoveries, after drinking water from a forgotten fountain. But here's what made my blood run cold. Every single one of them died exactly 40 years later. Same day, same hour, and when they opened the bodies, there were no scars, no signs they'd ever been sick. It was as if the diseases never existed, or as if something else had taken their place. My name is John, and I've spent 60 years chasing miracles that science can't explain. I've walked through hundreds of abandoned chapels across North America, searching for stories that time tried to bury. But nothing prepared me for what I discovered in the winter of 2018 in a collapsed chapel outside St. Cloud, Minnesota. The Chapel of the Sacred Fountain stood for barely 30 years. Built in 1887, sealed and abandoned in 1904, no official records explain why. The building sat rotting for over a century until a developer bought the land. That's when they found it, a locked iron box buried 3 feet beneath the altar. Inside were 23 medical files, each stamped with a red seal that read, "Case closed, deceased." But these people didn't stay dead. I spent 8 months tracking down descendants, searching through hospital archives, piecing together death certificates and census records. What emerged was a pattern so precise, so mathematically impossible, that it still keeps me awake at night. Between October 1889 and March 1902, 23 people visited that fountain. All of them had been declared terminal by Dr. Henrik Johansson, the most respected physician in 3 counties. Cancer, tuberculosis, gangrene, typhoid, diseases that killed without mercy in the 1890s. They drank the water. They recovered completely. For 40 years they lived normal lives. They married, had children, grew old, and then, between October 1929 and March 1942, every single one of them died. Not from their original diseases, not from accidents or old age complications. They simply stopped as if an invisible timer had reached 0. The last to die was a woman named Margaret Holloway. She was 9 years old when she drank from the fountain in 1902. She died at 49 in 1942, and she left behind a diary that no one in her family could bear to read until I found it. The trail started with a name I found scratched into the foundation stones. EM 1889, God's Mercy or Devil's Price. I spent 3 weeks in the Minnesota Historical Society archives before I found him, Emil Mortensen, a Norwegian immigrant farmer. His daughter, Astrid, was the first of the 23. She was 6 years old when tuberculosis ravaged her lungs. I found Dr. Johansson's notes, written in precise medical script. Patient presence with advanced pulmonary consumption. Both lungs compromised. Severe hemoptysis. Weight loss critical. Prognosis, death within 72 hours. Treatment, palliative care only. Signed, Dr. H. Johansson, September 28, 1889. Emil Mortensen had lost his wife to the same disease 2 years earlier. He wasn't going to lose his daughter without a fight. According to a letter I found in his granddaughter's attic, a woman came to his farm on September 29th. She wore black, carried no identification, and spoke with an accent he couldn't place. She told him about the fountain at the chapel. She said the water had memory, that it could remember what the body was supposed to be before the sickness took hold. She warned him there would be a price. He didn't ask what it was. The chapel had been built 2 years earlier by a wealthy industrialist named Charles Whitmore, who'd made his fortune in railroad expansion. His only son had drowned in a river accident, and Whitmore had the chapel constructed on the exact spot where they'd pulled the boy's body from the water. The fountain was fed by the same underground spring. Whitmore had it blessed by 3 different denominations: Catholic, Lutheran, and Methodist. He wanted to cover all possibilities, desperate for some guarantee his son's soul had found peace. The fountain itself was simple: rough-hewn granite, a brass spout shaped like a dove, water flowing constantly into a shallow basin. Nothing ornate, Nothing that looked remotely miraculous. Just cold, clear water that tasted faintly of minerals and earth. Emile carried his dying daughter through 2 feet of early snow. It took him 4 hours to reach the chapel. He arrived after midnight. The building was unlocked, as it always was. He found the fountain by candlelight, filled a tin cup, and held it to Astrid's cracked, bleeding lips. She was barely conscious. Her skin had the grey-blue pallor of someone hours from death. She drank 3 sips. Then she closed her eyes and went completely still. Emile thought he'd lost her. He sat on the chapel floor, holding his daughter's body, and wept until dawn. When the first light came through the windows, Astrid opened her eyes and asked for breakfast. Within a week, Dr. Johansson examined her again. His follow-up notes, which I found preserved in a medical college archive, read, "Patient Astrid Mortensen re-examined October 7th, 1889. No evidence of tuberculosis present. Lungs clear, weight restored. Patient appears in perfect health. No medical explanation available. Cannot reconcile with previous diagnosis. Have verified previous examination was accurate. This case defies all known medical science." Word spread slowly, carefully, through whispers in Norwegian and German immigrant communities. Families who had nothing left to lose. By 1902, 23 people had made the journey to that fountain. A coal miner with black lung disease, a mother of 4 with stomach cancer, a 12-year-old boy with bone tuberculosis so advanced his leg was scheduled for amputation, a Civil War veteran with gangrene that had traveled from a battlefield wound. The most disturbing was a man named William Patterson. He'd been cured of gangrene in 1894 after a farming accident crushed his hand. The infection had spread up his arm to his shoulder. 3 doctors had recommended immediate amputation. He refused and traveled to the fountain instead. He recovered completely and worked as a blacksmith for 40 years. When he died in 1934, the autopsy noted, "Subject's right hand and arm show no evidence of previous trauma, infection, or surgical intervention. Bone structure intact and consistent with normal development. No explanation for patient's documented medical history. It was as if their bodies had been reset, rewritten. The diseases hadn't been cured, they'd been erased from existence." But something else troubled me even more. Several of the autopsy reports mentioned unusual findings that the pathologists couldn't classify. Phrases like unidentified fibrous material near the heart, or cellular anomalies in the kidney tissue, unlike any pathology observed, or, most chilling, blood samples showed peculiar crystalline structures that dissolved upon exposure to air. Dr. Johansson had died in 1918, during the Spanish flu epidemic. But before his death, he'd written a series of private journal entries that his grandson donated to a medical museum in 1974. I spent 2 days reading through them, and what I found confirmed my darkest suspicions. In an entry dated December 1903, just months before the chapel was sealed, he wrote, "I examined Emile Mortensen today for an unrelated ailment. While conducting the examination, I noticed a small mark beneath his left collarbone, approximately the size of a thumbprint. It appeared to be scar tissue, but when I inquired about it, he became agitated and insisted it had always been there. I did not press the matter, but I noted that Astrid, his daughter, bore an identical mark in the same location when I examined her last spring. I've since noticed similar marks on 4 other patients who recovered at the fountain. They all claim ignorance of how they acquired these marks. I have documented the observation, but dare not pursue further investigation. I needed to know if any descendants still carried these marks. It took me 3 months to locate living family members of the 23. Most families had scattered, moved away, lost touch with their history. But I found 12 people willing to talk to me, grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the healed. I asked each of them the same question. Did anyone in your family have an unusual birthmark or scar beneath the left collarbone? 8 of them said yes. They sent me photographs. The marks were identical, roughly circular, about 1 inch in diameter, resembling a burn scar, but with a peculiar pattern inside, like interlocking crescents or the phases of the moon compressed into a single image. None of them knew what it meant. Most had never thought about it until I asked, but Margaret Holloway had known. The 9-year-old girl who'd been the last to drink from the fountain, who'd lived to be 49 and died in 1942. She'd known, and she'd written it all down. Her diary sat in front of me, pages yellowed and brittle, filled with the handwriting of a woman who'd carried a terrible secret for 40 years, and finally, in her last months, decided to tell the truth. Margaret Holloway's diary began on March 15th, 1902, the day she drank from the fountain. She was dying of diphtheria, the bacterial infection that had killed thousands of children across America. Her throat had swollen nearly shut. She couldn't eat, could barely breathe. Her father, Robert Holloway, was a railroad engineer who'd heard about the fountain from Thomas O'Brien, the same man who'd been cured of black lung 13 years earlier. The first entry was written in a child's shaky handwriting. "Papa says I will get better now. The water tasted like metal and dirt. I don't feel better. I feel wrong." The entries over the next 3 weeks documented her recovery. Her throat opened. Her fever broke. Her strength returned. But something else had changed. Something she struggled to explain with a 9-year-old's vocabulary. "I see things that aren't there. Shapes in the corner. Shadows that move wrong. Mama says it's my imagination. But I know what I saw in the water when I drank it." This is where her diary became difficult to read. For the next 40 years, Margaret documented experiences that would have gotten her institutionalized if she'd spoken about them publicly. She saw the other 22, not in person but in dreams, in reflections, in moments when she was alone. She knew their names without being told. She knew when they were afraid, when they were in pain, when they were dying. In 1929, when the first deaths began, her entries became frantic. "Astrid died yesterday. I felt it happen. I was teaching school when my chest went tight and I couldn't breathe, just for a moment. Then it stopped. I knew she was gone. We were connected, all 23 of us. We drank from the same source. We were all healed by the same thing. And now it's taking us back, one by one." She became obsessed with understanding what had happened. She traveled to the sealed chapel in 1931, broke in through a side window. What she found there she described in agonizing detail. "The fountain still flows. The water is clear. But when I looked into it, I saw them, all of us. 23 faces looking back at me from the surface. Not reflections. Something else. We're still there. Part of us never left. The water didn't cure us. It replaced us. It took the sick parts and filled the spaces with itself." Margaret consulted with spiritualists, spoke with priests, and read everything she could find about miraculous healings. In 1935, she tracked down the woman who'd told Emil Mortensen about the fountain in 1889. The woman's name was Elsa Bergström, and by 1935 she was 73 years old and living in a Catholic nursing home in Duluth. Margaret's entry from that visit is the most chilling passage in the entire diary. "Elsa knew I would come. She was expecting me. She said she'd sent 46 people to that fountain over the years. 23 drank the water. 23 refused. She said it was always exactly half, that the fountain chose who would drink and who would turn away. She said the spring beneath the chapel is old, older than the town, older than the settlers, older than the tribes who lived here before. He said some waters remember things. They remember what it was like before death existed, before disease and decay. They offer that memory to the dying. But memory is not free. Memory requires storage. We became the vessels. We carry the water's memory inside us. When 40 years pass, the water reclaims what it gave us. It takes us back to the source. I sat in my research room, Margaret's diary open before me, and felt something I'd never felt in 60 years of investigating miracles. Genuine fear. Because Margaret's final entries, written in February 1942, 1 month before her death, revealed something I wasn't prepared for. I went back to the chapel today. The doors are rotted through now. The fountain still runs. I touched the water, and I understood everything. It's not evil. It's not good. It simply is. The spring exists between life and death, and it offers a trade. 40 years for a piece of your soul. Not the part that makes you good or bad, the part that makes you yours. When we die, we don't go to heaven or hell. We go back into the water. We become part of what heals the next person. Astrid is in there now, Thomas, Rebecca, all of them, waiting. In 3 weeks, I'll join them. And we'll wait together until someone else comes, desperate and dying, and drinks. Then we'll flow into them, replace their disease with ourselves. And the cycle continues. The final entry was dated March 14th, 1942. One day before she died. I'm not afraid anymore. I've lived 40 years I shouldn't have had. I've taught hundreds of children, loved a good man, seen the world change in ways I never imagined. Tomorrow I'll return to the source. And maybe someday, when another child is dying and someone brings them to that fountain, a little piece of me will help save them. That's not a curse. That's immortality of a kind. My father saved me with that water. Now I'll be the water that saves someone else. The fountain gives and the fountain takes. Both are miracles. Both are terrible. Both are necessary. Margaret Holloway died in her sleep on March 15, 1942, exactly 40 years after drinking from the fountain. The autopsy found no cause of death. Her heart simply stopped. And on her death certificate, in the space for contributing factors, the doctor had written 3 words, unknown, medically impossible. I stood in the ruins of that chapel 3 months after reading Margaret's diary. The developer had abandoned the project after workers refused to continue. They reported feeling watched, hearing whispers, seeing faces in the water. The fountain still flowed, just as Margaret had described. Clear, cold, seemingly ordinary water that had remembered 23 lives and taken them back. I didn't drink from it. I won't lie and say I wasn't tempted. 60 years of searching for miracles takes a toll on the body. But I'd learned something in all those years. Every miracle has a mechanism, every gift has terms, and not all prices are worth paying. Margaret understood that. She made peace with it, but peace and acceptance are not the same as recommendation. The chapel was demolished in 2019. The fountain was filled with concrete, the spring diverted underground, the land sold to a housing development. I attended the demolition. As the excavators tore into the foundation, workers found something beneath the fountain, a copper box sealed with wax, buried deep in the spring's source. Inside were 23 glass vials, each one filled with water and labeled with a name. Astrid Mortensen, Thomas O'Brien, Margaret Holloway, all 23. The last item in the box was a note, written in handwriting I recognized from medical records, Dr. Henrik Johansson. It read, I sealed these waters in 1903, 1 vial taken from the fountain after each healing. I intended to study them, to understand the mechanism of the cures. I never found the courage. Whoever finds this, know that miracles are real, but they exist outside our understanding of fair exchange. These people were saved. These people were claimed. Both statements are true. May God forgive me for my silence, and may He forgive them for their desperation. I took 1 vial. Just 1. It sits on my desk as I record this story. The water is still clear after more than a century. Sometimes when the light hits it right, I swear I can see something moving inside. Shapes, faces, 23 souls waiting in liquid memory. The housing development built over the chapel site has had 17 families move out in 2 years. They report dreams of drowning, of drinking water that tastes like earth and metal, of children crying for help in languages they don't understand. The developer is considering abandoning the entire project. Some places don't forget. Some waters don't stop flowing just because we cover them with concrete and houses. The spring still runs beneath those homes, still carries whatever memory it held for centuries, still waits for the desperate and the dying to find it again. Margaret was right. It's not evil. It's not good. It simply is. A mechanism older than our morality, operating on rules we barely understand. 23 people were given 40 years they shouldn't have had, and when their time came, they paid with the only currency the water understood, themselves. I often wonder if they're still conscious in there, aware, waiting, or if they dissolved completely into something larger, something that exists between healing and claiming, between miracle and price. Margaret thought it was a form of immortality. Dr. Johansson thought it was a violation of natural law. Me, after 60 years of chasing the unexplainable, I think it's something far simpler and far more terrifying. A choice. Trade 40 years of life for a piece of your eternal soul. The fountain offers. The dying accept. And the water remembers everything. The question isn't whether miracles exist. They do. I've seen the evidence, held the proof in my hands, read the testimonies of the saved and the damned. The question is whether you're willing to pay for them. Because nothing, not even divine intervention, comes without cost. Margaret Holloway knew that truth. She lived it for 40 years and died understanding it completely. In my next investigation, I'll take you to a church in rural Montana where a paralyzed nun levitated during the final mass of 1901, and where the witnesses claimed she never touched the ground again for the rest of her life. But that's a story for another time. If this story made you question what you're willing to trade for a miracle, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to follow my journey through America's forgotten sacred places, where faith and terror walk hand in hand, and where the line between salvation and damnation is far thinner than we'd like to believe. The invisible world is real. The question is, are you ready to see it?